Hello, I'm Gail.
Hello, I'm Catherine. We're delighted to welcome you to today's episode.
Today, we are excited to talk with Dr. Lydia Manning. Lydia is 42 years old, and she's our second guest in our Advocates for Women Aging series. Dr. Manning is a gerontologist, educator, and entrepreneur with a wide range of experience in the field of aging. She's a professor of gerontology at Concordia University in Chicago and the College of Graduate Studies. Lydia received her PhD in social gerontology from the Department of Sociology and Gerontology at Miami University and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Duke University's Center for Aging. Her expertise lies in complex issues related to aging and well-being. Her research focuses on resilience with additional interests in religion and gender. Lydia also works as a gerontological consultant, where she views products, services, and programs with a gerontological eye in an effort to help businesses and organizations be age-friendly. Additionally, she's a certified dementia practitioner and an End of Life Doula. Lydia, welcome to Women Over 70 Aging Reimagined.
Thank you for having me.
We are delighted. There's so much we want to discuss with you. And your interests are so wide-ranging. They really are. And so will you please tell us why you chose this path?
In terms of gerontology and my love for aging and older adults, I will say often that I'm not sure I chose gerontology, but I feel like in some ways it chose me. And what I mean by that, for me, right, my work in the field of aging and with older adults is much more of a vocation than it is a career or a job. It really feels like a calling. And it probably all started, I think, when Gail and I were speaking before, I was telling her the story that I grew up as an only child, and my mother was a long-distance caregiver in the late 80s and 90s. And my grandmother was in a nursing home. And so as a result, I spent a lot of time in the nursing home with my grandmother and many of the residents, and people became my friends and my co-conspirators. And so I just had an appreciation for, I think, older adults at a really young age, and also learned pretty early on that if you sat at the table with the older ladies and you were younger, you would get away with everything. And you would also have a finger on the pulse in terms of what good gossip was happening. So I always appreciated being at the older adult table as a kid. And then realized in college that I could actually study. There was a thing called gerontology, and I could study aging and, go about the world and ask questions. I used to get in a lot of trouble for asking questions. So that's one too many questions. That's enough. And now I laugh. I get paid to ask questions as a researcher about aging. So it feels like a dream job. But yeah, for me, it was just a pretty formative experiences early on as a kid that helped me develop an appreciation for aging and the process of aging and for older people themselves. And if you talk to other gerontologists, that's a common narrative, right? With my students, when they come into the program, I will often say how and why, where, how did you find this program? How did you discover gerontology? And it's pretty similar. They'll have had a formative experience early on. And then realize, I can, this is a career path. This is a field of study and expertise, and I can, be a part of it.
Right. And you seem to have so many interests, as we said earlier, in different areas of the gerontology discussion or aging discussion. So can you expound on those a little bit?
I've spent the last, I guess my first research project was in 2004. So it's been, 15 plus years of trying to understand spiritual lives and experiences of people as they age. And so that's been a pretty common core in my work, even in moments where I've moved away from it, where I've taken time out to focus on resilience. The spirituality and resilience piece is so intimately connected. It's hard to tease them apart for people. So I think I've always been interested in sort of the experiences that sometimes are a little bit harder to measure and maybe a little bit harder to predict, and that tend to be pretty multidimensional. And I think spirituality is one such. I mean, you can measure it, obviously, there are measures, but I think I've always been intrigued by people who are seeking and people who are trying to make meaning of their lives, and the stories that they tell in that process.
So, Lydia, for people, sometimes people think of research as being data-driven and quantitative, and I suspect that is not how you approach at least this topic about spirituality and resilience. Tell us a little bit about how you go about the
So
investigation.
I'm trained as a qualitative researcher. I can operate obviously in both paradigms, and I've done mixed methods, but I really appreciate the qualitative approach in that, we fundamentally believe that meaning is co-constructed, right? We co-construct our realities, and that, you can ask questions to dig deep, to kind of jump in the brains and in the lives and experiences of people. And if you ask the right questions, their narratives will withhold rich data, right? That as qualitative researchers we're trained to make sense of and to code and to arrive at themes and understandings. So I'm always again trying to understand and describe and capture a lived experience. I'm not necessarily interested in predicting or measuring as I would be if I were in the quantitative realm.
Could you give us an example of how that unfolded with someone? What maybe you found?
In terms of like just asking questions?
Asking the right questions.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to some of my dissertation research. I wanted to understand the spiritual lives of women in advanced age, the oldest old. So all my participants were 85 plus. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to understand how they define spirituality for themselves, and the role that it played in shaping their lives, particularly as they were looking at less years on the earth as opposed to more. And I just was struck by how so many of these women talked about their spiritual belief and their framework. And it was different for different people. Obviously, the people had different views and different worldviews. But a common thread was that they garnered strength from their spiritual belief, and in many ways felt like their spirituality helped them collect resilience over the life course. And so their ability to really be able to survive and to bounce back and to even grow from just some profound tragedy was a theme that I wasn't anticipating there to be so many resilience narratives embedded in those spiritual life reviews. But those are indeed what the data yielded.
Is that what then put you on the resilience path?
Yep, I wanted to understand what is this? What do people mean by resilience, and how are we talking about it, and how are we experiencing it, and how are we comparing our past self to our present self and to our future self in an effort to kind of to withstand hardship and struggle. So that led me down that path.
Is it possible for people who are not particularly resilient to gain it?
I think so, but part of it depends on how you define resilience, right? And of course, then the important part of being a qualitative researcher is owning your own biases. So, given the work that I've done and the data that I've collected, I view resilience as a process and as an identity more so than a personality trait or an outcome. So I'm sure if you asked a psychologist who were, maybe wedded to some of the larger personality traits and certain things being fixed, I don't know that they would have the same answer. But I view resilience as a process that can be learned. I think it's like having a muscle, right? If you lift the weights and you do the work, you can increase your muscle. And I think this thing can be said for resilience. You can build your resilience muscles. Mm-hmm. And part of it's about coming up against adversity and making sense of it. But then I think having a protocol or a formula that you and that you activate to help you navigate. And I think that's learnable, which gives me hope.
Gives me hope too. Sure.
And I think we're all right now, we're all building our resilience muscles given the current state of COVID-19 and where we are, and it looks different for different people in different places and in different socioeconomic status and social structure. But I think we're all being presented with some pretty adverse conditions for which we are required to adapt and exercise resilience.
Mm-hmm.
So Lydia, what's involved in being a gerontologist consultant?
A gerontological consultant. I get to show up on the scene and help people sort through aging in a meaningful way. And some of it is about, like, for example, technology. I've worked with technology companies, helping them to create, platforms or create devices or create technological experiences for people. Knowing what we know about aging and the data, helping them to really understand the older profile that they're designing and working for. So it depends on, I've worked with individuals and helping them put a life plan together. How they want to map out their late life and what they want that to look like, and more of legacy work and generativity work. It just depends on, who needs some aging expertise and what do they want to do with it. Do they want to design programs? Do they want to design products? Do they want to design their life? It just depends. But I think given that gerontologists have a unique skill set, we're well positioned to help people think through aging, both the experience of aging at the individual level and then the larger experience of aging.
You talk about business and you talk about, I've heard you talk about age segregation and that it's detrimental. And so how do the two, how do they
link up or connect?
Link up, connect, right.
Yeah, I think, when I say age segregation is detrimental, I think about more from like a societally at large. And what I mean by that, I think we've gotten very good at compartmentalizing people into chronological age segments, right? And so I always, even in my own life, I encourage my girlfriends or my good friends, or even when I look around, if I feel like all of my peers are roughly my same chronological age, I start to get nervous, right? I'm like, okay, what do we know about intergenerational living and programming? It's good for us, right? It's good for us to have social networks and social supports and experiences of people in our convoy, right, of social supports who are not necessarily our same age. I think if you look at the data, on average, controlling for all other variables, mostly, people report better outcomes, better health outcomes, higher levels of satisfaction if you give people an intergenerational experience, right? Not only older adults, but also younger adults too. So we know that age integration is good for us, but yet we live in a world where we, I think, privilege age segregation, right? If you look at kind of how we do long-term care and, senior communities. And I get that not everybody wants to be in a young neighborhood and they don't want, maybe small kids riding their bikes everywhere. But I do think there's a danger in segregating because it creates this sort of otherness that I think is at the heart a bit of ageism. Right. So I see it all linked together. And in terms of business, I think, gosh, how many companies or employers are just missing out on such crystallized intelligence and, institutional memory and skill sets. Again, if we look at the data, we know older workers are our best workers. But I think there's that ageism is a slippery slope, and I think it can cloud people in business. So I think there's a lot to be said for intergenerational coalitions in practices, in business practices. And when I work with companies, I do a Gero scan with them. And part of it is looking at their leadership and their employees and their voices around the table. And when everybody's in their early 30s, I get worried, right? I think, where are your older voices and workers, and where are they here? And when you're helping, make some of these decisions about products and programs.
Can you give us a quick definition of crystallized intelligence?
Yeah, crystallized, and I was just putting together slides for one of my classes at the undergraduate level. But fluid intelligence is about, the ability to grab onto new tasks and to learn new things. And crystallized intelligence is almost that like body memory that we have, that we, like playing the piano or dialing the phone or riding the bike or putting on lipstick. It's like you don't have to learn anything new. It's like so crystallized, you have to think about it. And older adults are much better. I mean, they have higher levels of crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence sometimes can be a little challenging based on synapse firing and all kinds of complex cognitive realities in the brain.
Right. Yeah. I believe in the intergenerational discussion tremendously. Mm-hmm. And as you're saying this, it's making me realize why it is that I think so strongly about staying in a high rise where I live now and staying there as long as I possibly can, because I wouldn't want to be devoid of having these conversations with people of all ages. They enrich me. Yeah.
I was thinking about your story of your formative years. And the older I get, the more I appreciate my upbringing, where I was surrounded. We lived with my grandparents. And my great grandmother. So my great grandmother was my playmate.
Oh, I love it.
Right. So we just wonderful, wonderful memories of that, and great appreciation for those stories around the table that you mentioned.
Yeah. And depending on where people are and their belief frameworks, for me personally, I feel like that children, small children, and people who are advanced in age vibrate closer to the spiritual world at some level. And I feel like there's some really natural, beautiful coalitions that for some of us in midlife we're so distracted by our busyness that we sometimes can't tap into those frequencies as easily. So that's how I like to think about it. But
really curious about your being an end of life doula, how you moved into that, and tell people about what that is.
So end of life doulas are people who are trained, and some are certified depending on which organization you align with. I have not done my hours for certification yet, but I've gone through the training. You are trained to provide non-medical, emotional, social, and spiritual support for somebody who is dying. And that can look very much, you can be working with a person who is dying 6 months prior to death or 6 hours prior to death. It depends on where where they intercept with you in their process. There's a model that the doulas, I trained through the INELDA, which is the International Association of End of Life Doulas. And their model is very much about preparing people to do legacy work or summing up work with people, hopefully a little earlier than the active dying process. So maybe a few months where you're helping people through art or through music or through aromatherapy or whatever meaningful way that they want to kind of sum up their life and either give it to somebody, pass it along to family members, or just make sense of it on their own. So it's really about asking enduring questions and helping people make sense of things and feel like they're tying up loose ends. They also provide training for people to come in and do more of the active dying. So you can sit bedside and sit vigil with someone and their family. And usually they put, just like a birth plan, you would put together a death plan where the person ideally would have some input about who they want around their bedside, what sounds they want, what smells they want, what they don't want. And you just really create a space for people to have a ritual. I think in some places where we don't have a lot of ritual. And then you are also trained and equipped with the tools to come and do postmortem work with the family. So if there's, if somebody chooses to be cremated and they want to have a ritual or they want to do some sort of blessing way or something like that, you can work with the family to, create an art project. Again, it's about, I think, providing meaning and support at the end of life for the person who's dying and their loved ones. And how did I get interested in it? I think I've given who I am and my family, I've had experiences where I've been honored to be bedside at someone's death, people I've been close to. And in those experiences, I've watched something else happening in the room. And I've always been sort of intrigued, like almost a little, I guess if I'm honest, almost a little having my own anxiety around death, but then also being very intrigued and sort of hearing, particularly when I interview people, and depending on the interview and the subject matter when I'm collecting data, older adults are pretty articulate, usually the ones I've interviewed and talked to, about not being anxious about death, maybe about the dying process, but not so much about death itself. So I think my previous experiences with dying, my own anxieties, and then also realizing that as a gerontologist, if I'm not comfortable and I can't offer people end of life support, not that aging is dying, but when aging and mortality are so highly linked, I think there's some natural conversations about, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? When are we going to do it? And how? So I felt like it was important for me to have some of the training.
Do you talk with us about your graduate students, whom I assume are range in age? Some of them are probably quite young. And if you do, how do they take this? How do they respond to the conversation?
With death and dying? Everybody, for the most part, they tend to be very intrigued. We actually had a death and dying book course on the books several years ago. And when we revamped the master's program in gerontology, we removed it. And I've had several requests for people who want to learn more and they want to be able to understand death in a different way. So I'm actually thinking about revamping the curriculum and putting the course back in, because I think, even given now, if we can't have a conversation about mortality right now, what are we doing? Right? I think about even the larger social messaging about a ventilator, like, please bring a ventilator. It's going to solve everything, right? It's like, if people understood death is complex and hospital dying is even more complex, right? And so I think it's important for people to have an awareness. And I do think we have a growing death awareness. There are death dinners and death cafes and, the Illinois End of Life Options Group. I think people are becoming a bit more articulate than they were, say, 25 years ago. But I still think it's not the most comfortable conversation for people.
I remember when I was 15, my grandfather died. He lived with us, and no one talked about what his disease was. He went to the hospital. I remember getting a phone call from my father that said, he's gone. And today, like you, I've had the privilege of being bedside with several people close to me that have passed away. And I just think your conversation around this is so important. And really, death and dying, it has to be part of the general conversation, especially for anybody who's going into the aging field.
Yeah, I think, to so fully live, you really do have to contemplate mortality and think about, what that's going to look like. And I think when helping people plan too, reminding people that when you love somebody, you do the planning work and the hard work and the hard conversation piece before you go, right? Because it makes it easier for everybody when you're gone.
Exactly. Right.
So it's an act of love, I think, to have these conversations.
I agree. You're also a certified dementia practitioner. Talk about that whole field for a moment?
Yeah. There's a lot, again, I think dementia and Alzheimer's in terms of conversations are very much in the public discourse right now too. And I think you can, even here in River Forest, right, and Oak Park, we have now Dementia Friendly River Forest and soon to be Dementia Friendly Oak Park. They're in the process of applying for their certification through the Dementia Friendly America movement. So I don't know how much you know about DFA, but it's really, it started in 2015. The Dementia Friendly America Alliance came together with some major funders, and the whole goal was to create dementia-friendly communities across the country. And Dr. Raj Shah, who was at Rush, who is the Dementia Friendly Illinois He's in charge of that chapter. I've heard him present multiple places for these communities. And he will say that if, in many ways, Dementia Friendly America, it spread like wildfire, right? It started in really 2015, and here we are in 2020, and most every single state in the US has a Dementia Friendly chapter in place, and people are actively putting together communities. So Illinois has, I believe, 10 communities right now, River Forest being one of them. Oak Park will soon be designated. And the whole goal is to just raise awareness about dementia for people living with dementia, for their care partners, for businesses, for organizations. And it's multi-sectorial, so banking, finance, restaurants, parks and rec, hospitals, you name it. But the idea is that we go in and we train people in that sector, and we give them the tools to be able to support somebody who's living with dementia who comes in to receive services, or their family members. So maybe that's a restaurant. Al's restaurant in Oak Park on Madison, there was an article in the Wednesday Journal not too long ago about, they're naturally dementia friendly given that they are right across from Belmont. So people will come over, and they've developed little tricks, if not tricks, but they have a customer who sometimes will forget that they've paid their bill, and they will come back up and try to repay. So they have now a little stamp where they just stamp paid on the ticket, so that the person who pays knows, like, oh, I paid it. I don't have to remember that I paid it. It says paid. So it's just little things sometimes make a big difference. We did a sensory screening at the Lake Street Theater of It's a Wonderful Life for the holidays in December, and had about 30 people and their care partners, 30 people living with dementia. And it was, it was beautiful. Everybody was there. We watched the film together. The lights remained up a little bit, the house lights, so people could see, and the sound wasn't so intense. It wasn't so loud. And people talked and moved around, and it was fine because, we agreed all ahead of time that the social sanctions at the theater would be lessened. It's little things like that for dementia-friendly communities. But for me, again, working, I think, in my role as an educator, and directing a master's program and a doctoral program, there's so many interests from students that are so wide-ranging. A lot of them are very interested in cognition, dementia, and Alzheimer's. So for me, it was more about, not that I imagine I'm going to be practicing in a space where I'm going to be caregiving or supporting or even directing care for people living with cognitive impairment or dementia, but I am going to be instructing and coaching students. So I feel like for me, it's always important to have, my training be relevant and timely for them.
Yeah.
Wow. You have a very full plate. You teach, you do research, you direct these graduate programs, you consult. You are an End of Life Doula. Have I missed anything?
No. And I will say my End of Life Doula practice, I'm, again, those are skills and training that I have. And when it's just about time, like I don't have the time to dedicate to doing the full blown, you really have to be available, particularly people are going to die on their own schedules, right? Put them into a time slot. So, but I have been able to at least, hold death cafes and partner and work with other doulas in the area. And there's quite a bit in the Oak Park area.
I've been to several of those. There's a community. So. I wanted to ask about your research. What's your current research project or projects?
I have been, we're working on a grant right now, trying to understand from older adults' perspectives. Part of it is I've gone back to the religion and spirituality world, right, as a research agenda. But so if we know that for the most part, we look collectively at communities of faith across the country and we look at the data, most of them are aging, right? And most of them are comprised of people in older demographics. And so I'm curious, like, how do people feel as an aging member in their respective community of faith, right? Do they feel supported? Do they feel like that their community of faith is offering them what they need spiritually as they age, or even informationally as they age? Would they look for services in their faith communities? And if so, are we missing something by not having more of a presence of the aging network or the AAAs or the area agencies on aging? Like, could that be a place of service dissemination? So that's been an interest of late, really trying to understand from older adults' perspectives, their notions of support or lack thereof in their community of faith. And then thinking, if people don't feel supported or they want more opportunities for aging ministry, and because I'm at Concordia and it's a Lutheran school, it's LCMS institution, there are certain realities, certain funders, right, that we work with. And so our conversation and our tone takes much more of a Christian feel. But I think about, what are the opportunities for aging ministry, and how could we create a program? We're working right now, it's called the SAM program, which is Specialist in Aging Ministry. How could we create a certification process or a toolkit to help people get this information so they can pop back into their community of faith and be that aging specialist?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So not just the clergy, but the congregation members.
Yeah, or somebody who has a natural interest, or maybe they're a retired social worker who's worked in aging their whole lives. You know what I mean? And they just here's a ready-made toolkit that you can use for programming ideas, or for how to navigate certain things, or working with caregivers, or creating a dementia-friendly congregation, or a dementia-friendly service, or an age-friendly space. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways to think about it.
So is that an idea, or do those programs exist?
The SAM program, we received funding. So in addition to the master's program and the DOC program at Concordia, we also have an applied center for gerontology. And I was lucky enough to secure funding when I first took the job to help build out that center. So a bulk of our funding comes from the Russell and Josephine Cott Charitable Memorial Trust. And through that, we've garnered additional funding to create the Specialist in Aging Ministry program. So we're in the process of developing it. And that's what has led me to data collection, right? So prior to that, I really wanted to understand, if I'm going to develop something, I want it to be able to meet the needs of people. So what better way to understand that than to kind of boots on the ground, go out.
Right. Will that program be face-to-face or online, or a combination?
We are going to pilot it, and we'll do 2 pilots, one in Florida and one near Naples and one in Minneapolis, because that's where we have contacts. So that'll be face-to-face. But I think given that we do so much online education and programming, it makes sense to have it be available online. That way people they don't have to travel. Or we don't have to travel to them. So that's in the process.
Exciting.
I have some prospects for you, so let me know when it's going to be online.
I love it. Yeah, I will. We are, as I said, we're in the development phase now. So
wonderful.
Hopefully sooner rather than later. So yeah, that's been, back in the questions of support and, how does it feel to age in this community of faith? Are your needs met? Are they not? Those have been my questions of late.
Nice.
Considering that a good proportion of our listeners are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, is there anything that you have to leave them with that might give them food for thought?
I don't like this. It's so in the public way, but this successful aging, right, is a term. And if you look at the history, it's like it was a concept developed by researchers Rowe and Kahn back in the 90s. And it's this idea that you have to have minimal cognitive impairment, minimal physical impairment, and basic like health, wellness, and life satisfaction, and some resources to be aging well. And so I think, I look around and I think about the people that I know and who I talk to, who I work with, who I research, and I think about happiness. And there seems to be, despite other physical limitations or even potential, or even cognitive declines, right? I mean, I think people, when they have a sense of meaning and they have a sense of purpose and they feel valued, I feel like that in many ways supersedes some of these other sort of ingredients that we feel like we need to be aging well. You know?
Yeah.
So I think continuing to cultivate a sense of purpose and, being grateful. If you look at the data on gratitude and forgiveness, I mean, those are pretty powerfully predictive variables for late life satisfaction and positive health outcomes. I think, I tend to think about, what's the wisdom that the listeners can bestow on me, right? I don't want to wait until I'm 82 to have to figure it out, I think about, if you look at the happiness data in the literature, people on the later life upswing, like in their 70s, are the happiest, right? And so it's like, that's hopeful to me.
Yeah, I read something recently, a research reports that women in their later years are the happiest.
Yeah.
Across the board.
Yeah. I don't know if it's something
startled me, but
come into on our own as women, where we're like, okay, enough. Like, we've festered enough about this. I've worried about what the neighbors thought for long enough, and then here I am. You know what I mean? I've arrived.
Well, I wish I would be around when you're my age, 78, so that I could see how where your path has taken you.
Yeah, hopefully who knows what'll, the many roads that'll present, or I don't know.
You're doing wonderful work, and we're really thrilled that you spent this time with us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for doing your amazing work. I think there's something so beautiful about capturing people's experiences and these narratives, and particularly for women, as they age, and I think it's lovely.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you, Lydia, for joining us today. And listeners, we want to hear from you. Please share your thoughts on our Facebook group at Women Over 70 Aging Reimagined. Become an active participant in our community and join us at our Zoom events. Access our weekly Wednesday podcasts. And if you know a vital woman over 70 who would be a great guest, please recommend her to us at womenover70.com.